Slides are okay? I think we can get started. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. Hope you had a lovely break. My name is Sofia Rolim. I'm from FGV Law School in São Paulo, and I'm very happy to be the moderator of this panel on artificial intelligence versus democracy. So how to protect free speech in the age of AI. We'll be starting with an introduction from Tom Keck, who is a professor of political science at Syracuse University. And then after that, we will have interventions by Melody Mussoni, who is a digital policy officer at the European Center for Development Policy Management, Lynn Sandberg, who is a postdoc in political science at the University of Bergen, and also Alana Reynolds, who is a PhD student at the University of Central Florida. Thank you all for being here, and please, Tom, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and hi, welcome back from lunch. You get to hear from me again before lunch and after lunch. So I'm Tom Keck from Syracuse University, and what I wanted to do, and I'm looking at notes on my phone, sorry about that. What I wanted to do is a little context setting for the panel by saying a few words about free speech and democratic backsliding, which is the subject of my current book project. And I was actually on the fence about, I'm just going to talk for 10 minutes, I was on the fence about whether to show a few slides until this morning when Carl Henrich's presentation, he was running short on time at the end and he raced past an image that I wanted to pause on, which is actually this, but of course it's right behind Melody, but you can see it over here. But this is an image from VDEM's most recent democracy report, right? And what it shows is it shows the top 20 declining indicators, right? The 20 indicators from VDEM's, however many indicators that we heard about this morning, the 20 that are declining in the most countries, right? And 8 of them are about freedom of speech, and 2 others are about freedom of association, right? So a substantial component of the recent and ongoing declines in democratic health globally are related to freedom of expression. I have just one more image to show you. This is VDEM's Freedom of Expression Index across the full history, right? And so I'm interested in this part, right? Freedom of expression has substantially declined globally in recent years. And in fact, if you put the electoral democracy line up next to this one, right, they're more or less parallel, right? I mean, the freedom of expression, again, is a I don't want to overstate it, but it's a major component of the ongoing declines in democratic health worldwide, right? And so what I want to say a little bit about, to just set the context for the panel, is just some recurring dynamics of free expression conflict under conditions of democratic backsliding, right? And so one thing that happens, and this will be a surprise to nobody in the room, one thing that happens under conditions of democratic backsliding is that autocratic leaders tend to adopt what I think we can characterize as like a two-faced approach to freedom of speech, right? On the one hand, autocratic leaders regularly deploy new speech restrictions, right? So you can both formal and informal, right? And to silence or punish opposition politicians or protesters in the streets, to coerce and silence relatively powerless religious and cultural minorities, to crack down on independent media and universities, right? Across a wide range of fronts that many of us are familiar with, autocratic leaders, for obvious reasons, right, try to silence opposition and dissent. On the other hand, autocratic leaders regularly invoke free speech protections, right, in defense of themselves and their supporters who might be engaged in expressing hate speech or incitement to political violence or election subversion or any other public expression that runs afoul of the law. I guarantee you, when you try to arrest and prosecute the autocratic leader's supporters for doing any of those things, they will always invoke free speech principles in their defense, right? Now, as with so many other democratic norms and institutions, so also with free speech. Under conditions of democratic backsliding, supporters of democracy are often led to respond in turn, right? So under conditions of democratic backsliding, supporters of democracy also invoke both free speech protections and free speech restrictions, right? So supporters of democracy regularly invoke longstanding free speech protections in defense of opposition, politicians and protesters, relatively powerless minorities and independent media and universities. But they also regularly deploy speech restrictions, right? If you are afraid that the health of your democracy is declining and you still have some control over some levers of state power, and you see people out there spreading election misinformation intentionally, right? You are liable to try to use the existing legal bases to crack down on that and to limit it. And in this latter vein, of course, you can call on 80 years of European legal and political theory in support of militant democracy, right? The idea that to avoid a repeat of the Nazi rise to power in Weimar Germany, the state needs to crack down, democratic states need to crack down in advance on speech that challenges the liberal democratic order, right? So let me give you a couple examples, right? And these examples are examples that we've already been talking about today, right? So Bolsonaro era Brazil, right? So Bolsonaro attacked and limited freedom of expression across a wide range of fronts. There are lots of people in the room who know a lot more about this than me, but just to give a couple examples, right? I mean, you know, it's a room full of faculty and grad students, maybe Bolsonaro's, that's the academic freedom, are like the examples that hit closest to home, but he's like terrible for academic freedom across a wide range of fronts, right? Trying to ban the teaching of gender ideology. He himself regularly denounced leftist students and professors. He made politically motivated appointments of rectors to federal universities, sometimes intervened in appointment decisions for leaders of particular research institutes, sought to limit the participation of faculty in international scholarly meetings and events, right? Horrible threats to academic freedom. Bolsonaro and his allies, of course, also threatened independent journalists, some with harsh verbal attacks, sometimes prompting harassment and death threats, sometimes went so far as seeking even to jail his critics in the independent media and the like, right? So like autocratic leaders from time immemorial, right, Bolsonaro sought to silence his critics. There's nothing really new about that. But also, in Bolsonaro-era Brazil, supporters of democracy sought to limit freedom of expression repeatedly, right? So again, a couple quick examples, right? Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Moraes and the Brazilian Electoral Supreme Court repeatedly cracked down on false election-related speech, both during and after Bolsonaro's campaign for re-election. In the run-up to the election, Justice Moraes regularly forced the suspension of social media accounts that were spreading election disinformation or threatening judges and election administrators. In June 2023, right, so after Bolsonaro's no longer in power, the Electoral Court disqualified him from seeking office for the next 8 years. The holding rested primarily on this, I think it was July 2022, event where he calls all the ambassadors together and delivers a PowerPoint claiming Brazilian voting machines are unreliable and rigged, right? And it's false, right? And it harms free and fair elections in the country. And we're going to say you're not allowed to do that anymore, and you can't run for office for the next 8 years because of that. I've had conversations with a number of people in the room about this already, right? Justice Moraes' efforts have like sparked some civil libertarian concerns, right? Like, did he overreach? Did he go too far? But lots of Brazilian democracy advocates have also defended at least some of those actions, right, as necessary efforts to limit the destruction of Brazilian democracy. So Brazil's maybe the clearest example. I'm just looking at my capitalist clock over there. Brazil's maybe the clearest example, but I would emphasize that these dynamics have played out even in the United States, right? Where courts have long adopted a distinctly American approach to freedom of expression in which content-based state restrictions on free speech of any kind are sort of viewed as presumptively illegitimate. And yet even there, even in the United States, in just the past couple years, more than a dozen US states, so subnational governments in the United States, more than a dozen US states have passed new legislation targeting materially deceptive images, audio, or video depictions of candidates for office. So if you post in the couple months leading up to an election, if you post an AI-generated or otherwise manipulated video purporting to depict a candidate for election, but in showing them doing something that they never actually did or saying something they never actually said, that's now illegal in a dozen US states. These laws are all likely to be challenged in court. Some of them have already been challenged in court. But many of them strike me as, I think the devil's in the details, depends how it's written, but they strike me as at least arguably pro-democratic restrictions on freedom of expression. They clearly restrict freedom of expression, but they do so in the name of preventing a greater harm to democracy, right? On the other hand, a number of US states in recent years, some of you might have heard about some of these laws, a number of US states in recent years have enacted new speech restrictions that I think are clearly anti-democratic. I don't know how much this hits the news outside of the United States, but I'm thinking here in particular of legislation championed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and other Republican leaders that imposes viewpoint-based restrictions on university teaching about race and racism, on public expressions of gender nonconformity and the like. The two most famous laws that DeSantis signed in Florida are widely known as the Stop Woke Act and the Don't Say Gay Act, which gives you a sense of what those laws are about. These laws have been challenged in court as well, and I think it's pretty likely that US courts are going to serve as an effective democratic guardrail, putting some limits on those laws. But, so here's the thing in my last few seconds. If democracies are enacting both anti-democratic and pro-democratic or arguably pro-democratic speech restrictions, the question for court watchers is how much do we trust courts to effectively distinguish between the two? And to turn our attention back to the sort of AI-related examples that are the focus of our panel here, right? I mean, computer-generated election disinformation that can be distributed worldwide instantaneously and almost for free sounds, I was trying to think of a shorthand way to capture that. I mean, it sounds like a 20th century science fiction writer's perfect case for militant democracy principles, right? Just what can you even think of any other example of public expression that is harmful to democracy and hence that maybe democratic states should do something about? But as with the debates about Justice Moraes' actions in Brazil, right? It's okay, we should do something about that, but but without sort of unduly infringing our longstanding and hard-won commitments to freedom of expression in democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was really great. So let's go with Melody, please.
I think it's in your chair. Yeah.
Next to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, Siri, to be part of this important discussion. So when I was invited to talk about freedom of expression, especially and freedom of speech in the age of AI, I thought it would be interesting to bring in some of the lessons I learned when I was doing a research on digital rights in Southern Africa. So I'll mainly just touch specifically on one issue because of our time. So to start off with, everything that we know, everything that is happening offline is also happening online. So there's nothing new that is happening online that we can say, well, this has never happened. So the same with freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and how it is being infringed. And I thought to just kick off the conversation to just kind of set the scene on what is happening, especially within the public sector and where government surveillance is involved. So from the research that I did, specifically on Southern Africa, what we noticed is there is an increase in digital transformation of the public sector. A lot of governments are talking about e-government, providing of e-government services, smart cities or cyber cities. There's a lot of collection of biometric data. There's a lot of facial recognition technologies that they're importing, and of course, going into contracts with Israeli companies, for example. So there's a lot that is happening in the space as far as the digital transformation agenda And I think we need to start thinking about how these seemingly e-government projects who have an impact on our understanding of our rights, be it digital rights to privacy or freedom of expression. And what we actually find out when doing this research is a lot of AI tools, of course, they are being used when it comes to collection of biometric data, when it comes to maintaining of those biometric databases. There's a lot of AI tools that are being used. And what we don't know is the extent to which the government is able to surveil on people and how much are they willing to go. And if you look at democracies like South Africa, just a few years ago, there was a high court case where journalists actually took a government agency to court because they found out that their communications were being intercepted. And now we are talking of these AI tools that will allow governments to actually intercept communications, and we have CCTV cameras everywhere. Governments are able to actually know where you are. If you're having a public rally, they're able to pinpoint who is behind and who is participating because they have this biometric database. So these are causes for concern, and we need to start thinking about what does this digital transformation agenda actually mean for our digital rights. And even with the issue of misinformation and disinformation, yes, it's at the moment, because of AI, it kind of has been amplified, but there's also that fear that government are now using the fear of information and disinformation to come up with very restrictive laws, and a lot of these laws are meant for content moderation. So if you are an activist or if you're a journalist and you are speaking ill of the government, they can easily speak to a platform like X or Facebook to take down your content because it's part of spreading of misinformation. So there's quite a tricky situation there. I'm going to pause there, and since I have run out of my time, thank you.
Thank you so much, Melody. That also, you touched also on a very important issue of the relationship between governments and social media, these big corporate platforms. I think we can get back to that later. Please, Lynn.
Thanks. Is this on? Yeah, maybe it's getting, yeah. Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Lynn and I'm a postdoc here in Bergen. I'm a political scientist, and in my work I focus on micro-targeting, but also looking at online political discussions, including misinformation, and touch upon some aspects of content moderation. But I actually had a similar thought to you, Melody, that when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, it's not a new phenomenon, but with AI, the kind of scaling, the sophistication and ease of use make this a more pressing concern. But also, when we speak about artificial intelligence, I would also like to say something about the name, that it's kind of in the public debate quite misleading, since it's not intelligence as we traditionally understand it. It doesn't operate through understanding or reasoning. It's rather based on statistical analysis and pattern recognition. So I think also when we think about social media platforms, for example, or online discussions in general, now it's kind of left, or the problem with kind of incivility or intolerance, it's kind of up to the companies, the platforms to handle, but they also use AI or algorithmic content moderation to try to moderate the online discourse. And this has also been quite challenging, or it's difficult to actually scale up. So this also points to our understanding, or human understanding is quite crucial in determining what is problematic speech online and what is hate speech that should be limited or restricted. Yeah, I think I leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Go, Helena.
Right. Hello, everybody. So my name's Alana. I live in Florida, so a very relevant topic for me currently. So I'm going to talk a little bit about misinformation, disinformation, AI. That's kind of my research area. So something I wanted to start with is kind of talking about what is AI. I think Lynn brought up a good point. I think we use it to encompass a lot of things. And something that I like to think about in my research is a lot of what we talk about now is generative AI, so things like ChatGPT or photos. But something to also consider when we're thinking about misinformation and disinformation and free speech is also those algorithmic ones. So something, for example, that I wanted to touch on, just to kind of show why this is so important. So Facebook, for example, back in 2018, changed their algorithm because people did not have enough meaningful social interactions. So they wanted to create more meaningful social interactions. And they created this algorithm to do that. They wanted to make it a less negative space. So a good thought. What happened in reality is that actually amplified a lot of misinformation and disinformation online, because things that people had meaningful social interactions with a lot of times were things that made them angry or things that were polarizing. So just by having that in the background, it kind of changed the entire landscape of a social media platform. And we don't think about that. The things that we see every single day, everything you see on your phone, that's an algorithm or that's AI generating something for you to look at, basically. So I think that's just kind of something important to think about, both of those aspects, because a lot of times I think we focus on the generative AI and the deep fakes and things like that, but there's that other aspect as well that maybe we don't think about because it's in the background, but still something very important. So some other things to consider too. So the laws to regulate free speech, we touched on it in the US a little bit. There's some debate there. And then kind of across the globe, you know, there's laws coming in now where we're looking at regulating things like freedom of speech, looking at election disinformation, things like that. And the challenge is, of course, within democracies, how do we regulate that and also preserve freedom of speech? So a lot of laws, for example, in some EU countries, so Germany, for example, there's a lot of debate there on if that's been effective, because it has forced Facebook, for example, to improve the amount of fact-checking they have in Germany. But there's also that argument that that kind of chills freedom of speech or freedom of expression. So when we're looking at these laws, we just don't really have a good database. There's no systemic analysis of all these different laws, of the implications, anything like that. So just a big area for future research, and something we still need to kind of grasp is, what are these laws? What are they going to do? What's the effects? And what are those differences across all of those different areas of the globe? Because that's something I found, it's very focused on the US, and we need to think outside of the US to all these different areas and different contexts for the laws and then for the companies as well, because obviously what they're doing as well, this has global implications.
Thank you so much, Alana. Well, thank you for this great panel. We're ready for some questions from the audience. So while you guys line up, I might start with a quick question. I think it's really interesting what you mentioned about the algorithmic AI, and something that I find really concerning that I wanted to hear you guys about is how I feel that social movements, but also political parties, in this effort to, do things that work with the algorithm, so that not only the extreme right is going viral on Twitter, become actually very dominated by the logic of these networks, which are these big corporate platforms. And then, you give up on creating meaningful public debates in order to serve the will of the algorithmic god. So how can we, think of mobilization outside of these platforms? Let's hear from Kim, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm still Kim. So this is really a fascinating topic. And I'm wondering, so I have two questions. One is that the way that liberal societies have evolved, the worry is about content neutrality when it comes to state regulation, right? The idea being that if whatever it is the state does cannot actually be politically challenged one way or another. And of course, what that does is that eliminates one of the most effective ways of being able to distinguish, as Tom put it, pro and anti-democratic speech, because you need to know something about what they're saying to be able to do that. So the first question is content neutrality unhelpful at a time like this? And then the second thing, which sort of feeds into that, is to think about, free speech has become sufficiently normative that while states infringe it, as all the VDEM data shows, it doesn't disappear entirely, right? It's not something that autocrats can attack head on. So here's what they're doing instead, which is that you get a country, and I work on Hungary. tiny country, but it's on the leading edge of like technologies of autocratization. And so what happens there is that they've actually adopted Huawei for 5G. They've adopted Chinese facial recognition. They use Pegasus. They use FinFisher. They use all of the available technologies of surveillance, all of which are legal because, after all, they make the rules. And what they do is whenever somebody becomes a visible member of the opposition, or somebody really challenges the government produces compromising information, either real or fake, distributed through social media without any clear author. And they try to destroy the reputations of those who come after the government, all of which is perfectly legal, right? And so the question is whether we're, in some sense, chasing down the wrong tree to look at free speech and to think instead about these new techniques of repression of political oppositions, exactly using the platforms and the frameworks for free speech, because after all, isn't it important that all democracies keep them open? So just some thoughts about the current uses of this stuff.
Yes, hello, Ruth Rubio from University of Sevilla and also from the House. So I was wondering whether you had some insights on some of the attempts to regulate these issues. In particular, the Meta Oversight Board has been functioning for a while. I was wondering whether you could share some insight as to the extent to which that has been a successful or is being a successful way of self-regulation, so to speak. I don't know how many of you followed Trump and Elon Musk conversation on X, but it does, I think, raise issues about not just, misinformation, but the divide between, economic power when someone can own a social media platform like that, which I think also, is interesting from a democratic perspective, what that means. We've been obsessing about finance campaign and limits to that, but this is another, I think, polemical issue. And finally, I think you're right. I mean, there are, even within Europe and the US, there is disagreement about limits of freedom of speech. So I wonder, to the extent that there's convergence in trying to set the scope of legitimate limits to freedom of expression, which of the two visions of this is going to win?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really excited to have this panel because I've been talking about technology and its impact on democracy for a while. Just wanted to mention a few modes of repression that have been used in India for free speech, which include the law of sedition, the law of criminal defamation, the law of contempt of court. I just wanted to, so there is the existing sort of framework within which free speech is being repressed, and then add to that the opportunities and constraints of the companies that you were referring to, like Facebook and Twitter and so on, because Ruth mentioned that there's the US model, the EU model. India is sort of figuring out its own way of regulating. And as I mentioned in my keynote, that we have just rolled back a broadcast law, which was trying to control content creation on YouTube, Twitter, and so on. But it creates this problem wherein we have two behemoths. We have the technological companies on the one hand, and we have the Indian government. Now, sometimes it works to our advantage in the sense that, just like Kimlin Shipley was saying about Hungary, Indian government has used Pegasus or all of these surveillance mechanisms. And at some point, opposition MPs in parliament got messages from Apple saying that their phones were trying to be hacked. So the fact that Apple does not fall within Indian government's jurisdiction was actually a safeguard. But the problem then is that all of our data is actually with these big companies. And, the former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, he writes about techno-feudalism. He talks about how companies like Amazon and Facebook and so on, they've actually created this kind of feudal way. You have to kind of buy space within their domain, so to speak, to even. So it's not capitalism anymore. It's what he calls techno-feudalism, which has all the problems of feudalism as well as technology.
Thank you, Namita.
So my question is, how do you see the relation between corporations and freedom of expression? Of course, the United States is a very particular case in the sense that corporations have freedom of expression, which might be very foreign for other jurisdictions. But how are tech companies actually mobilizing the idea of freedom of expressions to advance their corporate interests? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
So I have a very basic question. So you spoke about disinformation, misinformation. So I'm ignorant. So how do you define these different concepts? And speaking about the possible laws that exist or are promulgated recently, so are there works about the way this information are defined and by whom? Who has the right, I mean, the right and the power to give the definitions?
You talked about traditional problems like freedom of speech and right to privacy, which appear on the realm and era of internet and the AI. There is also a problem, do we have to take one step back? And I refer to, for example, the Middle Age European state formation here. Is internet and the related problems, the AI problems, a new challenge to be regulated by the state? Or are we in the face of a new parallel universe where the sovereign, in the continental European context, the sovereign has to be decided first? There are some feudal elements appearing in the internet. You refer to change of algorithm policies, you refer to freedom of speech. You know, these things appear to the state. Kim Chappell told about the state. Even the state is not the actor, the decisive actor is just one of the elements, or one of the actors who tries to get the best out of what is happening in this state of nature. So this is what I've been thinking about. So do we have to look in that way, or do we have to look in a way that how shall we regulate? If you have to look in the other way, that the internet realm is appearing as a new sovereign, I think we have to do some algorithm constitution on an international level. What do you think about that?
Algorithm constitution, that's interesting, please.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. It was super interesting. My question is like an open one in a more like optimistic tone to try to reclaim internet in an emancipatory way. So I'm thinking if you have any examples based on your cases about like emancipatory ways of artificial intelligence, or maybe like solar punk futures that are using, I'm thinking, for instance, in the Algorithm Justice League or feminist artificial intelligence, like experiences that show other ways of appropriate this technology in a more like revolutionary way, let's say. And if you could share it with us to also like reclaim that from solar punk futures and not only like the cyberpunk dystopia, you know, like more like what can we learn from other experiences? So yeah, thank you.
That's really cool. Thanks. Thank you everyone for the really insightful questions. I think we have time to hear from our panelists for 2 minutes each, if that's okay. Should we do it reverse and start with Alana and with Tom? Can we do that? Okay, please.
Okay.
Just go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take, I think, that one on disinformation and misinformation and the definitions. So the answer is that we're really bad at defining all of those things, but generally disinformation would be something that's false information and it's intentionally being spread. So you're spreading that with the intent that it's false information to do some sort of harm normally is generally what we'll say. And then for misinformation, that's maybe you're spreading that information and you don't realize that that's false information. So you're not intentionally trying to do harm. You're spreading it because you want to spread that, you believe in it. So those are kind of the different definitions. And then in terms of the law, how it's defined, the answer is not well. So there's a lot of different laws in democracies and autocracies, and some of them define fake news or disinformation or misinformation. Some of them don't. Some of them just leave it very vague. And in terms of who gets to decide what that is, especially in a lot of those autocratic governments that are passing those laws, the government gets to decide, so they can say, this is what we think fake news is, and then it's still going to be up to the government to basically make that determination. So if that does go to the courts, you know, hopefully there's a court there that will serve as a guardrail, but absolutely not a guarantee. A lot of the arguments have been for some sort of independent oversight board or some sort of regulatory commission that will come up with kind of those definitions to determine whether or not something is disinformation or something that can be prosecuted, but not something that we have a really good answer for. And like I said, there's just a lot of research in that area that hasn't come out yet, where we haven't kind of figured out what all these different laws are and how we should define it and what the effects are. It's just something that's not researched very well yet because it's also new.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great to hear. Also, just to remind everyone that on Thursday we are having another panel, which is specific about regulation of AI and internet governance. So I think that some of these issues that you touched upon will get a chance to keep on the discussion. Please, Lynn.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for great comments and questions from the audience. Really interesting. But I think I will take the one on Meta and also what you touched upon before we opened up for questions. So I would say we still have very limited insight into the business model and how the algorithms work and function. There has been some attempts made to improve this, but I would say that it hasn't been working very well. So now the EU also have the Digital Service Act that you can use to actually force Facebook or Meta to give out information. But I would say also that we're not yet sure if this works or how well it will work. But you also brought up political parties, and this is my special interest. And I've been interviewing parties about their use of meta advertising and micro-targeting. But also for the parties, it's a big problem, and it's a big problem that they are so reliant on these platforms. And some parties spend half their campaign budget. Meta earns a lot of money on democratic elections, but they don't know how things work. So we also, with some colleagues this year, we had a quite, if I may say it myself, fun idea, because since we have so little insights, we use the parties to place ads through them. And then we can get kind of a reversed engineering effect, so we can actually see how the algorithm works, and we can see how it prices parties differently, because this is something that has also been indicated, and no one knows why. And I don't think Meta is so interested in finding out. So I think also a problem is kind of the big social media platforms are now, or we have some indications that they're trying to kind of withdraw from politics and responsibility. So I think the coming years will be kind of determined in what direction we go, and it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. Also with the EU AI Act now that I think they approved in this month. Yeah, so thanks.
That's super interesting, super interesting. Thank you, Lynn. Please, Melody.
I think I'll just add to the question on regulation and just commenting to add on to what you have said. So you see a lot of social media companies and digital platforms, they do have what they call community guidelines, which essentially try to put in place some sort of rules and regulations on free speech. So to some extent, it helps when it comes to taking down certain content that may be that may amount to hate speech, for example, or even disinformation. And just to add to what you said, in Europe with the Digital Services Act, it actually helps to regulate what happens on most of these digital platforms. But the problem, I guess, with African actors is that lack of jurisdiction. A lot of these media, social media platforms and digital platforms, they don't have any physical or legal presence in Africa. And a lot of people actually using these platforms to communicate. So that question becomes relevant, that are community guidelines enough? And as African governments, what should they start thinking about to sort of have a regulatory framework in that space? And then that also touches with the question on internet and as a new platform. I think a lot that happens on the online, like I said in my interventions, it is also happening offline. The only difference now is that it's more amplified, especially now when you talk about artificial intelligence. So even when we look at things like cybercrime, crime has always existed, but now because of the tools that we have, digital tools, it's more amplified, and we now need to start thinking about different ways in which we can actually regulate that space. And if the companies are not in your region, in your country, how are you going to go about that? And I remember with Cambridge Analytica scandal that a lot of regulators in Africa were actually concerned that, I can't remember the figures, but South Africa, they had a huge portion of citizens who were affected by that. In Kenya, of course, there were reports that the Cambridge Analytica also influenced had a part to play during the Kenyan elections, and regulators had to come together across Africa asking those questions like, how are we going to hold Meta or Facebook accountable? So I think from a European perspective, because of course they are the regulatory leaders, it's a bit easier for them to regulate these platforms, but for most African governments, it still remains a challenge.
Thank you, Melody. Please, Tom.
Thank you. So lots of great questions. Let me start with the questions that sort of touched on, like differences between US and European approaches to free speech, and that probably will eat up all my time, but I'm gonna start with that at least. And there was a couple different questions that touched on that, like whether they're converging, and if so, in which direction. So I've thought a fair amount about this, and I guess my general take, so like writ large, US and European approaches to free speech, and then how do they apply to the sort of new social media landscapes. So like writ large, there's trade-offs, right? I mean, I don't think it's right that like one of them is better than the other. I don't think that's the best way to frame the question. I think each of them is good at some things and bad at some other things, right? And so, and I think both US judges and regulators and European judges and regulators are both struggling with how to adapt their free expression regimes to the new information landscape, because the questions and the trade-offs involved are genuinely hard, right? I mean, it's like, so like on the European side, right? So like the EU's Digital Services Act, and if you look at that, and if you look at, and it's brand new, so we don't know a lot about how well it's working yet, but like, or if you look at some of the Article 10 jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, which is not new and has been around for a long time, right? I mean, there's some advantages over the US approach, for sure. Like if you think democratic states should have some leeway to regulate, destructive hate speech, but I think there's some clear disadvantages as well, right? I mean, the Strasbourg Court has repeatedly allowed state restrictions on what I think are sort of fundamental political speech rights, right? So like, and including in the internet context, right? So allowing states to impose third-party liability on, right? So like if you own a giant social media network, yes, okay, one thing, Elon Musk, but if you own a small website that allows public comments, or even if you have a Facebook account that is set to public and people can comment on it, you can be held criminally liable in many European states for things that somebody else writes. Like, my own take is that that is erring too far in the direction away from freedom of expression, right? But the US approach has all kinds of other problems, right? So the US approach, like Facebook and Twitter, are entities that possess free expression rights, which has some clear disadvantage, right? I mean, so like the owner of Twitter, X, right, has endorsed Donald Trump for president and is spending lots of money and using his own, I mean, he has jerry-rigged Twitter's algorithms to boost his own posts, right? And he is like repeatedly retweeting like election disinformation and public health disinformation and the like. And yet in the US, it's like sort of legally impossible to do anything about that because Twitter, so that's some clear downsides of the US approach, but there's upsides too, right? Because if you, in the US as compared to the EU, there is, this has a negative connotation for good reason, but I think that has an upside as well, right? There is a free marketplace, right, for privately operated speech platforms, right? Nobody is forced to use Twitter, right? And if Elon is driving it off a cliff, right? And if there are other, in theory, the US approach allows the market to operate and provide other regimes of different styles of content moderation to users who would prefer them, right? And so I think that has some advantages as well as some disadvantages. I don't think either body of law, constitutional law and regulation has figured out a good way to deal with the new media landscape, because I think there's genuinely hard trade-offs involved. All right, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Perfect, Tom. And we're right on time, so let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. And let's head to the break.